Were there doctors at that time discussing any of this, or was this a whole new realm?
No. I always say, whoever named antibiotics, we've all had biology, it means life. Anti-life? What were they thinking? Well, along comes probiotics, pro-life, just really good. I thought we didn't know what that was. Yeah. All I remember is him telling me that when I take a teaspoon of this, so I told Dr. Godschalk, and he said, that's interesting. This guy was a rocket scientist. And we didn't have probiotics back then. You couldn't walk into a health food store and get anything but rice cakes. That was health food store back then. And so I learned from thousands of patients. For 26 years, I worked in clinical nutrition for doctors. And so I had better know nutrition. I took courses in, homeopathy. I took courses in nutrition. And I learned a little bit so that I could counsel these people. But basically, when I started talking about lactobacillus acidophilus in yogurt, I thought there's got to be a therapeutic entity to some of these things. Linus Pauling said, take a little bit of vitamin C every day. So I'd tell these patients who didn't only have ear, nose, and throat problems. Howard was an ear, nose, and throat doctor. When I began questioning them, they'd say, Doug, could we hurry up with that shot today? I got to go to the GI doctor, having horrible stomach problems. And then, man, I can't get out of bed. My hips are so bad. And I get migraines. When I began to ask them, 3 out of 4 ear, nose, and throat patients had stomach problems. So I began to looking into what we call today the terrain of the intestine. God put a couple pounds of good yeast, candida yeast, and good bacteria, lactobacillus strains, and others, of bacteria in our intestines. And when you swallow an antibiotic, it's an indiscriminate bacteria killer. God put good bacteria in here. It kills it. The good news is antibiotics are a lifesaver for many. It can cure the ear infection. But I began to deduce, wait a minute, a pill at a time, we're erasing that delicate terrain that makes some of the vitamins that are necessary for us to live. This bacteria in the gut wasn't put there by mistake. God doesn't make mistakes. It was put there for a reason. But in the 1940s, during World War II, and I totally understand this, 1944 specifically, we began to use antibiotics out in the battlefield for men who would have died from a cut or a wound. So kind of came full cycle. It's been one, as you and I talk about, one tap from God at a time. Yeah. And it's now 54 years later, and I'm still working in this field.
Like you said, antibiotics are good when you have an actual bacteria infection.
But if it's not. Right. That's the question, right?
And then it's, doing more harm than good.
Well, Mark, it's actually more interesting than that. Every woman knows that if she takes several rounds of antibiotics, she's kind of predisposed to a vaginal yeast infection, right? And we now have a pill for that. Diflucan is a 1-pill vaginal yeast cure, and it really works. We didn't have Diflucan. Diflucan came on the market, by the way, as an AIDS medication.
Oh, did it?
All it does is kill yeast and fungus. So is it human immunovirus or human immunofungus?
Oh, wow.
I digress. But the thing is,
that's another show, right?
Antibiotics fuel yeast.
Yeah,
so if this wasn't a bacterial infection in your gut, if it's a yeast, you take a one-time tummy ache and turn it into a chronic gut problem.
So if antibiotics are eliminating gut flora in general, and they are also creating what can be a breeding ground for fungus, so a lot of that fungus begins in the gut. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and now, Evan, we're finding many diseases. We're talking past couple of years about depression. Is that a gut problem?
Right.
We know that Crohn's, irritable bowel, IBS, many of these Crohn's disease, these things are in the gut. We're now realizing they disseminate. Can get into the bloodstream, are pumped by the heart to various organs in our body. And so much has been learned. Had I have dropped this 50 years ago, because I was made fun of. I
was going to ask about this too.
I'm telling you, I played baseball with a bunch of guys when I got back from Vietnam. I've always liked softball and, always been athletic. And telling those guys after we cleaned up afterwards, why are you sick? I got a yeast infection. You just don't say that. Right. The locker one. It's kind of the way it's worked my whole life, you know. But then you begin to help people in these clinical situations, not only telling them psyllium can bind these poisons that antibiotics are from the gut, and it helps with elimination. You begin to really talk to these patients now. 10 years into this, I'm saying, I know you're here for psoriasis. This was with David Weekley here in Dallas, Johns Hopkins guy. I know you're here for psoriasis, but do you have other problems? Yeah. You know, why do you want to know? Well, I might be able to help. Okay, my right ear rings horribly. And Doug, I don't want to tell anybody this. I'm wearing this thing on my neck for a reason. I actually have lymphoma. See this big lump, half size of an egg? I have cancer. I have Hodgkin's lymphoma. And you begin talking to these people. And you put them on a diet. We now know what fungus eats. So it needs to be starved, not like bacteria or virus that you can zap. It needs to be starved and killed. Fungistatic means to stop fungus. Fungicidal means products that kill fungus. So I began, all these doctors said, just, you know, use the antifungals. I'll prescribe them if I feel they're needed. Doug, I'll have them follow your diet and whatever supplements you need them on. And 2 weeks later, they'd come back. I'll never forget the day David Weekley told Linda Spradlin, the nurse, put Kleenex boxes in each of the exam rooms. These people, some of them would begin crying.
Oh, I'm sure.
Why have I lived for 30 years with this psoriasis? I'm going to take off my shirt, you guys, and show you my back now. 2 weeks later, look, it's so much better. Then, Evan, you begin to learn, I took the Band-Aid off. This lymphoma apparently wasn't cancer because it's way down. I saw my oncologist, and he's very excited. And he said, whatever you're doing, keep it up. So you realize that the fungal realm is different than taking an antibiotic and killing it. As a matter of fact, an antibiotic might begin it.
And we had talked about this also. There's pretty good science behind all of this. I mean, there's science where fungus is linked to etiology of sinusitis, of Crohn's. I mean, there's a lot of this that's like backed up, right?
I have a friend who is a case western. He's a mycologist. He's about my age, one of the most brilliant men I've ever met, Dr. Ghanum. And I interviewed him, and he said, you know, Doug, I've followed you for years with your belief that cancer was a fungus. I'm a mycologist. You know, I'm a kind of, you know, back off. But he said, now we're realizing that why are we seeing colorectal cancer in 12-year-olds? That's a 50-year, but we're reading headlines now. A 500% increase in the past few years of colorectal cancer in preteens. Wow. And why is that? So they say, well, it must have something to do with poor quality food. Truly, I think Crohn's and colorectal cancer need to be seeded. You got to put a seed in there. Antibiotics have been known for years to initiate DNA changes, gut changes.
If we're talking about DNA changes, are we talking about things like cancer as well? Can it scale to that?
Yeah. So the American Cancer Society said cancer is a rapidly multiplying mutation. Starts with a cell. So the question has to be, what in the world could breach a cell wall, which is a pretty thick membrane, then breach the nuclear wall where the DNA is, and then change that DNA? Fungal mycotoxins, 33 of them, do that. Wow. And that, by the way, Evan, is in a home with Aspergillus mold growing in it.